We're YouTubers.
We're YouTubers now. We're here to talk about the impacts of The Second Woman, the Young Vic's play of The Second Woman, and all of the questions that we had around the performance, which, if the viewers don't know, I really like saying that, if the viewers don't know, it's the same scene 100 times for 24 hours.
Yeah.
So that is part of the reason that we have called our vlog
The
24-hour woman. And that's also kind of a play on what we both talked about of, like, you know, being a woman is really a 24-hour job, and it's bloody difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
And even in the last filming that we did, like a real nice test to come back and discuss everything again, and actually come back with a few new questions as well, and a few new observations about, like, us as women, and how, like, obviously I didn't see the play, well, not obviously, I didn't see the play. You saw the play, and it really ignited a lot of questions about, in particular, endurance.
Yeah.
We wanted to talk about courage, some perspective. We wanted to talk as well a lot about like cultural diversity in situations like this.
And the power and the privilege that, who holds the power, who holds the privilege.
Yeah.
In different scenarios.
And it's just left us with a whole lot of questions.
Yeah, and every time we talk about it, we get fizzy, don't we?
Well, yeah, I know. I feel like every single time we meet up and talk about this, we end up going like, okay, we'll just have a quick coffee, and it's like 3 hours later, exactly. Which is always a pleasure, but it's so focused on, like, what about this, and actually what about that, and why don't we as women or just like younger generations or older generations, why aren't we doing these things? So I think there's so much to talk about today.
The pithiness of what I've been thinking about a lot, and more recently as we've been preparing for recording, is the capabilities of women.
This is a big one.
And the expectations of women, and I think the play and Ruth Wilson in her delivery, and the audience too, actually, there are so many, well, for me anyway, so many parallels and questions and reflections about those things that are in the play, in the delivery of the play, and that play out in life for women of all ages, shapes, sizes, colours, creeds.
Yeah.
You know, they're not all the same, because we're not all the same as women, but there's so many things from that play that I still think about and laugh about, because there were some really funny times.
There's a sequence that you go through in your blog about The Second Woman, which is this is the 7-minute circuit. It goes like this: the man walks in, she says, "You don't love me anymore," or something like this, and it plays through every single time, and the response that the opposing partner, the opposing player, gives is normally one that's quite dismissive. Some of the circuits you've described as a bit gaslighty. And just going back to what you were talking about before in the, I can't remember the wording that you used, expectations. So the expectations that the character Marty, who is the circuited character who plays opposite Ruth Wilson, having some of those responses be quite gaslighting is the only
I think
phrase.
I think gaslighting is the right phrase to use.
I mean, it's maybe not English, but it's the right phrase to use in the sense that it's such an important perspective piece. And I've been thinking about us filming last time in the garden. The kind of self-gaslighting that I did to myself, where I was like, why hasn't this worked the way that I wanted? You should know better. Why didn't you understand that this might not have worked out exactly the way that you wanted? And then to someone else, like I've been talking to some friends, some male friends, going like, this is a project that I'm really quite excited about. And they're kind of not dismissive, but like it's a non-problem to them because they would never question or over-question themselves for all of those things, or over-criticize themselves for all of these things that I think are so ingrained in feminine thinking. So then when you have this circuit, which each time is a bit gaslighting, like, you don't love me anymore, what are you talking about? Is such a, it makes so much sense, I think, and this is obviously a very broad kind of manner of speaking, because obviously not all women think the same, and not all men think the same, and we have a lot of crossover between genders. But if we're talking on the whole and a little bit more generally, women do have this deeper perspective or deeper understanding of maybe a few more aspects. So say a behavioral shift, you go like, something's wrong, but a man won't pick up on that because they've never had to. Someone else might. Let's get really like careful around language, just because we love boys, we love them, and sometimes they don't have the same thought process as us, but that doesn't mean all of them don't have the same thought process as us,
and not all women have the same thought process as us either.
No, definitely not. So that's why it's probably really important to use it in the context of the play, given that the majority of the opposing players were men. The perspective that Ruth Wilson's character has, which is there's a shift. She can see it, she can sense it, and it's ignored, it's dismissed, it's, you're wrong, like, what are you talking about? But I think the capacity for women to see a different perspective, or account for a lot more perspectives in one view,
and we can overcomplicate things by that.
And this is part of a major issue, I think, for women. And this comes into the self-gaslighting thing. It's seemingly so easy to gaslight us because we've already got such a rich kind of inner world.
A lot of self-flagellation that goes on, self-punishment about being perfect, and the reason why we need to be perfect is to not draw attention to ourselves too much. Actually, it's like hiding from the front. In a way. If I talk from my own perspective, part of my perfectionism is about not being ridiculed. I don't respond well to ridicule unless it's done with generosity, and in which case it's not actually ridicule.
No, that's constructive feedback. But even the response to constructive feedback has to be, you can't go like, oh, well, that's actually really hurtful. It has to be like, oh, okay, well, and thank you so much for that feedback.
And there's something about the intention in which that feedback is delivered, and whether I've asked for it. I think that's really important.
And in your vocation as well, that your career as a coach, understanding how to like appeal and give feedback and be gentle and considered, and to take the person into consideration when you're delivering the feedback. That is so wrapped up in a variety of perspectives that sometimes they're not afforded to women in the same capacity.
Yeah, and it's making me think of the play and the in fact some of the differences, I suppose, because in theatre you're putting yourself out there. You're going to get feedback whether you like it or not. So, you'll get critique in the press. You also get immediate feedback from the audience in terms of the energy that's in the room and the noises that are happening in the audience about what's going on, and being able to sense whether the audience is right there with you or bored or whatever. And then, of course, for the second woman, it was at the end of every 7 minutes. There's applause.
There's critique.
Yeah. There's feedback. Yeah. Every 2 hours, there was a 15-minute slot where Ruth was able to go off stage, obviously have a drink, go to the loo, probably splash water on her.
Yeah. Maybe just have like
eat some carbs.
and have like a really big cry. Yeah. Just be like, oh my god, I'm so tired.
Yeah. So at the end, in the precursor to that 15-minute block, there was obviously a lot of applause then. But how often are women expected to not seek applause and not attention,
to do something incredible and just be
under
humble.
the radar? Yeah. And when we draw attention to ourselves, that involves all sorts of critique from other women, unfortunately, I think, but also from men that might be voyeuristic, it might be judgmental.
One of the biggest unlearnings that I think a lot of women have gone through is the subconsciously doing things for the voyeuristic man.
You're making me think of the play, and particularly the dancing scene, which was so often a point of hilarity and uncomfortableness in the audience, and also by the opposing player. So the dance scene starts with some music, and Ruth has her back to the audience. I should say Virginia, really. The character is called Virginia. So Virginia has her back to the audience, and Marty goes up to her and usually starts to kiss her on the back of her neck, or put their arm around.
Can you imagine 100 people doing that?
Yeah. Ugh. Not always, but it's that kind of
tenderness.
Yeah, coming, because it's a breakup scene. And it's a complicated breakup scene. So they come up behind her and try to start moving with her, because she's already started moving actually by that point. That's the invitation for them to come over to her, is that she's already started to dance. And it's a typically feminine start to dancing. It's very stereotypical in that
shoulders, hips,
yeah, all of
bit
that.
of hair,
all of that very stereotypical feminine way to start dancing, to draw someone in to come and dance with you and move with you. But very quickly, it's so not that. And it can get really awkward and really clunky, and sometimes she's wildly over the top about the way she moves, and sometimes she just hangs herself like a dead weight, and they're trying to move around with her with a dead weight. She could be hanging off them with her arms around their neck. She might have her arms around their waist. She might be on the floor at some point, and there's this whole point at the end of the dancing is how do they get her onto the floor relatively gracefully? Yeah. And a lot of the times it wasn't, and that is very funny. But the uncomfortableness about the power dynamic, I think, about the masculine and the feminine in that part of the scene, I just found it absolutely fascinating, and how what had preceded that, the dialogue that had preceded that, and how she'd flung the noodles at them.
You talked a bit about some of the circuits being like quite hypersexualized as well.
Yeah. Some of them were. Yeah. Some of them really weren't.
Yeah.
But some of them
was it, in your opinion, kind of like more of a obviously it's a play.
Yeah.
But was it maybe slightly more performative if the opposing player was maybe a little bit more handsome? It's a character to character observation. Yeah. It's not like a Ruth Wilson observation, but it is a character to character observation where actually pretty privilege is very much a thing.
Yeah.
And I wonder how that would have maybe changed the dynamic.
Yeah, there was definitely some times when older white men, the awkwardness that the audience felt about that kind of dance scene with an older white man who wasn't attractive.
Yeah.
And I would say lots of judgment from the audience about that, unfair judgment. And then, men who were more attractive, it was kind of willing it on, that kind of sentiment.
Yeah. Woo!
Yeah. And the laughter was different for sure.
Yeah.
And then there were times when there were definitely, so not all the men were all the players, because they weren't all men, not all the players were professional actors.
Yeah.
Some of them, it was obvious that they either were super nervous with some acting experience, or they were super nervous with no acting experience.
Yeah.
There were definitely some men, and they were men in the ones that I saw, because I only saw one woman play Marty. So there were some men who you could almost read it in their faces and their body language that was like, this is Ruth Wilson. I can kiss Ruth Wilson. I can dance with Ruth Wilson. I'm going to get what I want from this.
Yeah.
And that shockingly, that happened,
Yeah, the little kind of, very literally 15 minutes of fame kind of aspect.
Yeah. This will be something I can tell my mates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can read that as well. Like one thing, I used to do a lot of theatre when I was growing up, and one thing I always loved was audience energy. Like the hardest performances, and I did a lot of performances. The hardest performances were the ones where the audience didn't react, because you would have to keep the energy up. If you were small like I was I'm so tired. The best ones were the big energy, the loud laughs. Every single time I go to watch anything live, even if it's music, I think there's a real point and purpose in applauding loud, laughing loud, and trying to give the energy back that they that the performers are giving you. But the one thing that's always so interesting is how visible power dynamics are on stage. Like, even if you think you're acting and you're hiding them very well, or like any kind of arguments, or like there are only so many things that you can let wash over you and go like, right, well, I'm just going to continue to act normally. You can read people's genuineness on stage, even if they are in character. Like, the best actors are the ones that always make you believe, because they're actually, there's substance, there's genuineness to who they are portraying. My housemate's an actor, and she's talked about the process in which she gets into character, and actually actors have to be highly empathetic people. They need to be able to understand, oh, this is why that person's done that. Oh, this is maybe a reaction that they would have to this, because the way that I view the situation is X, Y, Z. What's so interesting to hear you talk about as well, given that majority of these opposing players, obviously you have Idris Elba, gorgeous, who is obviously a professional actor, and you do have some professional actors. When I was doing an awful lot of Googling, I found that like some massive names were in it. Now these are professionals who understand that like I can do this but not this.
What's different about the second woman though is it's not a fully scripted script. She doesn't have to accept the kiss. She doesn't a lot of the time. She might offer a cheek. She might move away. She might lean in. The opposing player might choose to kiss her on the forehead, kiss her hand, kiss her on the cheek. Sometimes it was very clear that they wanted to kiss her on the lips, and she very clearly moved away because she was not having that. And there was one man who, this was the bit that I found the most shocking of all the scenes that I saw, and I saw dozens in the hours that I was there. This man leaned in, and she pulled away, and he pulled her head and kissed her on the lips. And that is what the entire audience did.